When you look at this photo of Lindsey and Patrick Clancy and their children, it is difficult to imagine the horror that would destroy this family, something that would take 3 young lives and leave a mother in a wheelchair for life.
She had to strangle the kids to unconsciousness and then keep strangling them for additional minutes.
Lindsey Clancy admits she did it. She took the lives of her 3 young children, but she also believes she should not be held criminally responsible.
It's the government's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was not acting as a result of a mental disease or defect.
And Lindsey's husband, Patrick, is standing by his ex-wife, the woman who took the lives of his 3 children. And Patrick will be perhaps the most important witness at the trial.
On January 24, 2023, Patrick Clancy left his home in Duxbury, Massachusetts to pick up takeout. When he returned, his 3 children were dying. His wife had strangled 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan with exercise bands. She strangled them to unconsciousness and then kept strangling them for additional minutes. This is not in dispute. This is what she admits. The mother who killed them now sits in a wheelchair, paralyzed from a suicide attempt. And the father who lost everything.
This trial in this case is really all about a family, or what used to be a family. Lindsey Clancy, Patrick Clancy, they are no longer married. All right. So now his ex-wife, they don't have that connection anymore. Right. The children are gone and now the marriage is over. So what was a family at one point is no longer a family. And I think it's an important factor in all of this. It will be because of Patrick, who is a victim in all of this case, but will also be the most important witness in the entire case. So the fact that he comes to this as someone who is no longer married to the defendant and his testimony purportedly will help the defendant, I think that adds to his level of credibility in front of this jury. But as a victim in the case, you know, the way he's looked at will be equally important by the jury. He's the man who lost 3 children. He's the one who did nothing wrong here and does not have his family anymore. And it's because of the woman at the defendant's table, his ex-wife, Lindsey Clancy,
who came home to find his children blue and gasping, now stands beside the woman who took them. He says he has forgiven her. He says you should too.
As this jury must decide if Lindsey is a mass murderer or the victim of postpartum psychosis fueled by prescribed drugs, which made her kill those 3 little children. This is the biggest trial of the summer, and it's a case involving incredible heartbreak for those 3 children who were brutally killed by their own mother. But the question...
Before we go deeper into what this case actually reveals about justice, mercy, and the limits of the law, make sure you're subscribed to Beyond the Gavel File, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Let that land for a moment. The man who lost 3 children on the same afternoon, whose daughter Cora wanted to be a doctor and a mama, whose son Dawson hugged tighter than most adults, whose baby Callan smiled at him whenever he walked into the room. That man wrote a public letter 4 days after the murders asking the world to forgive his wife. "I've forgiven her," he wrote. "You should too." This is not a man in denial. This is a man who has filed civil lawsuits against the doctors who prescribed his wife's medication. This is a man who has remarried and moved to New York. This is a man who has rebuilt his life from the ashes, and he is now the prosecution's star witness, testifying for the defense.
One of the main witnesses on her behalf. And he has said, I did not marry a monster. I married a woman who has medical problems, who has mental illness problems. So it will be interesting to see how much during his testimony he talks about his current personal life. You know, when people are called to the stand, the prosecutor will generally ask, or the defense attorney will ask, and where do you live today? And you have since remarried. I mean, they generally get into the personal aspect to lay some foundation to prove that, yes, I've moved on with my life, but also I think as a juror, you might find that more impactful that, wow, he left his marriage with Lindsey, got remarried, but yet is still standing by her, the mother of his children, and has come back to testify on her behalf.
Yeah, I mean,
That is the hinge upon which this entire trial swings. The legal mechanism here is where the story transforms
Its version of insanity, which is lack of criminal responsibility. And in Massachusetts, the way the law is written, it's a huge advantage for the defense. And I'm going to explain it all. But that advantage is so much greater than you would have in almost any other state in the nation, in terms of burden of proof, how it's going to go down, and what prosecutors need to prove. So the insanity defense in Massachusetts, they don't call it insanity, but it's a lot easier for the defense to win. It's never easy for them to win, but it's a lot easier in the state of Massachusetts. And it ultimately comes down to what I look at as the ultimate question, because we bring in the jurors, right? And the question is, the jury will know that this woman took the lives of 3 innocent children who were absolutely defenseless and who loved their mother and relied upon their mother for everything. Yet she's the one who took their lives one at a time. Can they say not guilty when asked about that woman who they know did it? And that is the overwhelming challenge that defendants have when they claim insanity or lack of criminal responsibility. So even though there is a huge advantage in the law in Massachusetts for this defendant, that advantage does not get you over the top of the hill. No, it doesn't. It's going to come down to the facts. It's going to come down to the facts. And the question is, what does this jury believe about what this woman was doing at that moment? And I'm going to explain all the law to you as well, so you have a clear idea of what needs to be proven in this case in order for this jury to...
from tragedy into thriller. In Massachusetts, the insanity defense does not function as it does in almost every other state in the nation. In most jurisdictions, the defendant must prove they were insane. The burden is on them. Not in Massachusetts. Here, the burden rests entirely on the prosecution.
Defendants in Massachusetts, the burden of proof. Now, in the federal system and many other states, the burden is on the defendant to prove that they were insane or lacked criminal responsibility. In Massachusetts, the burden rests entirely on the prosecution. The defense first has to present some credible evidence like psychiatric expert testimony, medical records that creates a reasonable doubt regarding the mental state of the defendant. They'll be able to do that in this case. That's not a problem. Then it will be the Commonwealth's burden, the prosecution's burden. Once that defense is raised, which it will be, the prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was criminally responsible. To do this, the prosecutor must prove either the defendant did not suffer from a mental disease or defect, or despite the mental illness, they retained the substantial capacity to appreciate their actions and conform to the law. But they've got to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the huge difference here. Like, reasonable doubt is this little piece up here, right? They've got to go beyond that. They've got to go beyond that to prove this. The burden is on the prosecution. And there's 2 different ways to prove lack of criminal responsibility in Massachusetts. This is not the way it is in the other states that we cover here on Court TV. So this trial, huge advantage for Lindsey Clancy and the defense. Doesn't mean they're going to win. It just means they have a much better chance in Massachusetts.
The defense merely needs to present credible evidence of mental disease or defect. And once that threshold is met, the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was not acting as a result of mental illness. But here is the operative clause that changes everything. The defendant only needs to prove one of 2 elements. First, that she did not appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct. Or second, that even if she knew it was wrong, she could not conform her behavior to the law.
The part that makes it much easier for a defendant in Massachusetts. They were unable to conform their conduct to the requirements of the law. Even if the defendant knew their actions were wrong, their mental disease or defect rendered them substantially unable to control their behavior and follow the law. The defendant only needs to satisfy one or the other. So if Lindsey Clancy knew what she was doing was wrong, but still, because of her mental disease or defect, could not control her impulses to do it, the jury must find her not guilty. Think about that for a second. Think about it. It's so different than most states. Most states, do you know right from wrong? They cover it up. They flee. They try to hide it. They plan it carefully. None of that really applies in Massachusetts if they cannot control their actions.
In other words, she could have known exactly what she was doing, could have known it was murder, and still walk free if the jury believes she could not control herself. That is the legal reality. That is the opening through which this defense intends to drive. And here is the question that reframes this entire story as a thriller, not just a headline. If a mother who planned the killing of her 3 children, who sent her husband out for food to buy time, who coolly answered his phone call while her children were dying upstairs, can be found not guilty, then what is the measure of criminal responsibility in America? What is the line that cannot be crossed? The prosecution will argue this was cold, calculated, and controlled. They will point to the timing, the deception, the phone call, the absence of any prior violence. The defense will point to the postpartum psychosis, the cocktail of medications, the sudden onset, the woman who was a nurse, a mother, a wife who apparently loved her children with intensity, and then took their lives. The jury will have to decide. But here is the haunting reality. If they find her not guilty, she will not go free immediately. She will be committed to a mental health facility for observation. She will be reviewed every year. But if she is no longer considered a danger to herself or others, Lindsey Clancy could be set free.
Now, if in fact she's found not guilty by lack of criminal responsibility, what happens? Here are the consequences. This is what takes place. Immediately, the judge will order the defendant to be secured in a mental health facility for observation up to about 60 days. Then the DA or the facility can then file for a civil commitment to try to keep them committed and locked up in a facility. However, the timeline of that is indefinite. The commitments are usually for 6 months, and then they're reviewed every year by the judge. And the legal test is, are they a danger to themselves or to others? So if at some point, if she's found not guilty, right, and then at some point is no longer considered a danger to herself or others, Lindsey Clancy could be set free.
The father's forgiveness is not a legal argument. It is a moral one. And it sits in the jury box alongside every mother who wept during voir dire, every juror who said they could not serve because they are a parent, every person who knows that a mother killing her children is the inversion of everything we believe about family. The very fibers of her soul are loving.
I want to share some thoughts about Lindsey. She's recently been portrayed largely by people who have never met her and never knew who the real Lindsey was. Our marriage was wonderful and diametrically grew stronger as her condition rapidly worsened. I took as much pride in being her husband as I did in being a father and felt persistently lucky to have her in my life. I still remember the very moment I first laid eyes on her and can recall how overcome I was with the kind of love at first sight you only see in the movies. It really didn't take long before I was certain I wanted to marry her. We said I love you to each other multiple times daily, as if it were a reflex. We habitually started every morning with a passionate hug, yielding a sigh of relief like we had each received the perfect medicine. If too much time passed without a hug, she'd look at me and ask, "Did you forget?" We mutually understood the reality that people can have bad days, but we stuck to the rule that when one of us gets lost, the other was always there to bring them home, always. She loved being a nurse, but nothing matched her intense love for our kids and dedication to being a mother. It was all she ever wanted. Her passion taught me how to be a better father. I want to ask all of you that you find it deep within yourselves to forgive Lindsey as I have. The real Lindsey was generously loving and caring towards everyone, me, our kids, family, friends, and her patients. The very fibers of her soul are loving. All I wish for her now is that she can somehow find peace.
Patrick Clancy wrote, "The real Lindsey was generously loving and caring towards everyone. That is the man who lost everything. That is the man who will take the stand and tell the jury she was not a monster. and the jury will have to reconcile that testimony with the image of exercise bands wrapped around the throats of children who loved their mother and relied upon her for everything. The gap between the official record and the human reality is where this case lies. On paper, it is a homicide with an insanity defense. In practice, it is a collision between the law's capacity for mercy and the public's capacity for justice. The same man who called 911, who heard his children's last breaths, who watched his baby hold on a little longer to spare him whatever pain he could, that man is asking the world to find compassion. That man is the most important witness in the case. That man is standing by his wife, and he has said plainly, openly, in a letter that raised over
$1 million were raised, and what was written here, so important, so significant. I just want to read it to you. I just want to read you the words of Patrick Clancy. And this was, again, posted on GoFundMe on January 28th. This was posted just 4 days after the 3 children were strangled and just 1 day after the last child died. Thank you all for your love and support. The warmth I've received from the community is palpable, and your generosity gives me hope that I can focus on some sort of healing. I've seen all your messages and contributions, including some from people I haven't seen in over a decade, and many I've never met. I see and appreciate every one of you. A lot of people have said they can't imagine, and they're right. There's absolutely nothing that can prepare you. The shock and pain is excruciating and relentless. I'm constantly reminded of them, and with little sleep I dream about them on repeat. Any parent knows it's impossible to understand how.
From strangers, I promise I'll put all my energy into healing and rediscovering my purpose. Now here is the question we leave you with. The GoFundMe post is public. The letter is public. The legal filings are public. Read them for yourself. Read the words of a father describing the morning routine of children who no longer exist. Read the medical records, the expert testimony, the jury instructions that define the Massachusetts standard. And then ask yourself one question: if 12 people look at the woman who did this, and the man who forgave her, and the law that shifts the burden to the prosecution, what verdict does justice demand?
Lindsey Clancy could be set free. Think about that. All right, that's it for this time. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Vinny Politan. Until next time, please, especially in a case like this, please.
That is not a rhetorical question. That is the question this jury has to answer. And we will follow every piece of evidence, every witness, every motion until they do. If you made it this far, hit like, share, and subscribe to Beyond the Gavel file. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the moment that verdict comes down. Because this case is not just about one woman, one family, or one courtroom in Plymouth County, Massachusetts. It is about what we as a society decide is unforgivable, and whether the law agrees,